This episode contains details involving the murder of a young child and may be distressing for some. Listener discretion is advised. "13-month-old Zachary Andrew Turner was left in the care of his mother. And it feels like that there were a million reasons why he never should have been. Why we, the rest of the world, should never have come to know Zachary, and why we should not be here talking about him today. Welcome back to the tale of losing Andrew, losing Zachary, a California Dreaming multi-part series. In part 2, we went through the relationship between Shirley Turner and Andrew Bagby, the events leading up to his November 5th, 2001 murder, as well as the beginning stages of the investigation that led to Shirley becoming the prime and only suspect in his death. We left off with her fleeing the United States, heading back to Canada 7 days after the murder. If you have not listened to parts 1 and 2 yet, you might want to pause this here and go listen to those first and then come back to this. We are going to pick it up from there, and again, I retrieved this information from the Turner Review and Investigation from September of 2006 by the Newfoundland and Labrador Child and Youth Advocates Delegate. So, on the advice of at least one or maybe two attorneys, according to Shirley, she was told to get in her car and go to Canada. That isn't exactly what she did, though. She didn't take her car. She didn't take much of anything, leaving most of her stuff behind in her apartment. She abandoned everything and flew to Canada using her Canadian passport. She arrived in Toronto and checked into a motel. She called her older daughter. Remember, she lives in Ontario, Mississauga specifically, which is only 27 kilometers or 17 miles away from Toronto. Her daughter came to the motel to visit her. Shirley spun yet another story for her daughter. She told her that after Andrew's murder that she had stayed in a hotel in the United States, though she didn't say what dates or for how long. And the reason she said she did that was because she was so fearful that the person who murdered Andrew may have seen her with him at Keystone Park and may have targeted her too. So what Shirley is implying here is that she left the country out of fear for her personal safety. But then while Shirley was still in Toronto, she told another family member and friend in Newfoundland that she came to Canada for a vacation. Or she said she came to see her son because he'd been injured in a car accident. This can't be true because her son was in a car accident after she arrived in Canada. Even though the accident happened pretty close to the time that Shirley checked into her motel in Toronto, it definitely wasn't what prompted her to fly in. Also, later on in February of 2002, when one of her attorneys in the United States was deposed, he said that he advised her to return to Canada after Andrew's murder to be close to her support system and her family in coping with it. On November 13th, Shirley called a family member on the peninsula in Newfoundland, and that family member asked her about what happened regarding Andrew's death. Shirley said that Andrew had been standing on a street in Latrobe when a car drove by and shot at him, killing him. Another family member on the peninsula talked to Shirley that same day, and Shirley told this person that after she returned from her visit with Andrew to Iowa on November 3rd, that was the last time she'd seen him. She said that he called her and asked her if he could borrow her gun. He asked her to fly with the gun at his expense from Iowa to Latrobe, where he would meet up with her, but Shirley said that she would not be able to get on a plane with a gun. So next he asked her to get in her car and drive the gun from Iowa to Pennsylvania. And she said something along the lines of, like, stupid that I was, I drove nonstop to Pennsylvania with the gun. So here is a very important piece of evidence. It's the first time that Shirley is admitting to being in Pennsylvania with the gun on the day of the murder. The person that Shirley was telling the story to said to her, "If you think you're innocent, I'm sure you didn't drive 16 hours without stopping for gas. And how did you pay for your gas? By credit card or what?" Shirley didn't answer. In another call with another family member that same day, Shirley continued talking about her contact with Andrew before his death. She said that she met him in a park in Pennsylvania and gave him her gun. He put the gun in a white plastic bag and placed the plastic bag in the trunk of his car. They said their goodbyes, they kissed, and she left and drove back to Iowa. Shirley was emphatic. He was alive when she last saw him. Later on in November, Shirley told another family member that Andrew's death could have been related to something homosexual, but there was never any evidence that that was true at all. So, Shirley's son had gotten into 2 back-to-back car accidents. The second one was more serious than the first. He found out that he punctured a lung in the second one, which was November 13th. And remember, Shirley flew into Toronto on November 12th, and he was made aware that he might need surgery. A family member called Shirley in Toronto to inform her of her son's condition, and she said that she would immediately travel to Corner Brook, Newfoundland from Toronto. And this is a 30-hour, 2,400-kilometer, almost 1,500-mile drive, plus a ferry to get onto the Newfoundland island. In the meantime, still working on her story, her alibi, her excuses, and whatever else, Shirley stayed in contact with Heather, Andrew's former fiancée. In one of those calls that took place before November 15th, Shirley started talking to her about her plans. Shirley told her that her son was in Newfoundland and had the 2 car accidents, and that the second one, which was more serious, is what prompted her to leave Iowa for Canada. But we know Shirley was already in Canada when the second accident happened. In another conversation with the ex, Shirley told her that before she left the United States, she requested a leave of absence from her job in Iowa through the end of November, which she said she was granted. She said she had a plane ticket to go back on November 30th. None of that was true. On November 14, 2001, Shirley and her daughter flew from Toronto to Deer Lake, and from there they rented a car. On the next day, the 15th, Shirley called Heather again and told her she was in Corner Brook and going to go to St. John's with her son when he's released from the hospital. On the 16th, Shirley's daughter flew back to Toronto, and Shirley and her son drove to St. John's together. This is where she would settle until August of 2003. In St. John's, Shirley stayed at her son's apartment, where he lived with some roommates. On November 16th, Shirley arranged for him to be hospitalized so his injuries could be treated. She next contacted a family doctor for herself. She made an appointment for November 18th, which she attended. Shirley went to this appointment as if she were deeply grieving the loss of Andrew and overwhelmed with stress by other things happening at the same time. And I presume that those other things might be those pesky murder charges hanging over her head. She asked for a referral to a psychiatrist, but not just any random psychiatrist. She wanted to be referred to Dr. John Doucette. She knew him from the time when they were in their clinical clerkships when she was in her 4th year of medical school. Shirley had some history consulting with psychiatrists over the years. She had been seeing one in the United States. And remember her suicide attempt in April of 1999 on her ex-boyfriend's doorstep? One of those letters was written to that psychiatrist. She had consulted a psychiatrist in 1998 who diagnosed her with major depression, but she did not ask to be referred to this doctor. She had been referred to psychiatric treatment in Halifax when she was taken by that same former boyfriend to the hospital. When she got back to Iowa after murdering Andrew, she went to a psychiatrist who prescribed her some sleep medication. Now it's clear that Shirley is a very troubled woman, but she is also very cunning. Everything that she does and says is a calculated move on her part, but I'm certain that all of you are picking up on that by now. Shirley's first appointment with Dr. Doucette was on November 20th, 2001, 2 days after she was given the referral. In a letter Dr. Doucette wrote to the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary in August of 2003, he said, quote, "This referral to me was requested by Shirley, as I had previously been acquainted with her a few years earlier during her rotation through psychiatry when I was a staff physician working at the Health Sciences Complex, and she was a fourth-year medical student for a 2-month period working our psychiatric service. Shirley's past history revealed episodes of depression and anxiety on at least 2 occasions in the past. These were secondary to stressors at the time. The first was in 1991 when she saw a psychologist for several visits when she was the driver of a motor vehicle which struck a pedestrian. She reported that she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, but was not treated with any medication. In 1996, when her children left her custody to live with their father, Shirley had a very difficult time and felt rather depressed and anxious for several months. But we know that Shirley made the decision to send her kids away to pursue her education, which at many points in her life was her priority. So Shirley was treated with an antidepressant after this, but it did not help her at all. The more recent history told to Dr. Doucette by Shirley involved a boyfriend, Andrew Bagby, having been killed 2 weeks prior to her having seen the doctor. He said that this event was very traumatic and confusing for Shirley, that she felt consumed by shock and disbelief and grief. She felt a terrible sense of helplessness and hopelessness and loss of control and inability to be of significant help to her boyfriend, the police, and his family. She was also initially stressed by the fact that her son had been involved a week earlier in a serious car accident and was hospitalized. Additional stressor is the fact that earlier this week, Shirley had a positive pregnancy test. This pregnancy resulted from intimacy with Andrew Bagby on October 20th, 2001, when she visited to attend a wedding with him. So Shirley's pregnant with Andrew's son now, finding out just weeks after he was murdered. Dr. Doucette continued describing his November 20th, 2001 examination of Shirley. She complained of severe emotional distress, crying spells, poor sleep and appetite, distressing dreams, and having difficulty focusing and concentrating. His initial assessment of Shirley is she presented symptoms of a type of adjustment disorder predominated by anxiety and depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and bereavement. His assessment would run the gamut of criticisms, however, but I'm not going to get into all that because I don't think what Shirley was presenting to him was genuine. But Dr. Doucette went on to say that he saw Shirley on a regular basis every week or two for the following year, and his assessment did not change over time, nor did his assessment change that there were any risk factors of harming herself or others. He later changed that because she did tell him that she made a suicide attempt in 1999, but that revelation did not have an impact on his conclusion that Shirley was not a risk of harming herself or others. Also, never mind the fact that she was the prime suspect in Andrew's murder at the time and for more than a year following his death. No risk of harm to herself or others. Very haunting words coming from a doctor. Shirley frequently expressed that her issues were not related to her own stressful circumstances, but rather issues of how her children were coping, and she frequently expressed worry about her youngest. She could not take medications since she was pregnant with Zachary out of fear of causing him harm. She did try Celexa after Zachary's birth, but stopped after about 6 weeks because she saw no improvement. The last time Dr. Doucette met with Shirley was on July 15, 2003. She reported to him that she had significant periods of feeling very tense and anxious and was having difficulty sleeping and episodic fatigue. These were punctuated with feelings of uncertainty, fearing the lack of resolution of her legal problems. She reported her mood as generally good and trying to be optimistic. To him, at this time, Shirley appeared a little tense and tired, but very reactive otherwise, and saw no indication of thoughts of harm to herself or others. As a result of this visit, Dr. Doucette gave Shirley a prescription for lorazepam to be used on an as-needed basis for any persistent insomnia or overwhelming anxiety. And in just over a little more than a month's time, Shirley Turner would be dead. Getting back to the weeks following Andrew's murder. On the evening of November 16, 2001, Heather came home after an evening out at the movies to find a phone message from Shirley asking if she could borrow her stethoscope because she was worried about her son because of his car accident. To me, it seems like a ploy to come over to Heather's place, as she is actively trying to get people on her side to believe that she wouldn't have been the one to have killed Andrew. Heather called Shirley back a little before 1 a.m. on November 17th, but the person who answered the phone said that Shirley wasn't there. About 15 minutes later, Heather received a knock at the door, and she just knew it was going to be Shirley, and she was terrified. Heather tried to call a friend so she could have someone on the phone when she opened the door, but the friend's line was busy. So Heather opened the door, and there was Shirley. The visit lasted for 45 minutes, and I believe Heather stepped out into the hallway while Shirley stood close to her front door. Shirley, I guess, was making small talk. She said she was glad that Andrew's memorial service was held in an auditorium instead of a chapel at Memorial University. She said that she would not attend the service if it were in a chapel out of respect for Andrew because he was an atheist, a claim which there does not seem to be any evidence of. Shirley then added that Andrew's parents didn't seem to think that it was important because they made arrangements for a religious service for him the previous Wednesday, November 14th, in Pennsylvania. She told Heather that she was upset that she was left out of the memorial service program for Andrew. She also, of course, professed her innocence and having anything to do with his murder, going so far as to tell her that it could have been her, meaning Heather, for all anyone knew, that murdered Andrew. Heather was so put off by the remark that she would have a letter from the Healthcare Corporation of St. John sent to the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary on November 28th to affirm her physical presence in St. John's at the time of Andrew's death. Eventually, and thankfully, Shirley finally left. Heather tried the friend whose line had been busy again, and this time she got through. She wanted to talk because Shirley's visit and her insinuation that she could be the killer too rattled her a lot. Later that same day, November 17th, Shirley called Heather again, consumed with the topic of who should and should not participate in Andrew's memorial service on November 20th, adding that she might speak at the service. The next day, November 18th, Shirley called again and left a perplexing message that said, "I'm calling because I really need to get in touch with Andrew's parents. You could give them my number and ask them to call. If you could do that, or let me know if you can't do that, then I could try another way of getting in touch with them." Perplexing because Heather had so many times advised Shirley as to how to get in touch with the Bagbys. So despite the fact that Shirley had left the United States abruptly and had earlier said to Heather that she had no intentions of returning to the United States, Shirley called Heather yet again on the 19th and said that she was only thinking about moving back to Newfoundland. Remember, she's trying to push the narrative that this trip to Canada was prompted by her son's car accident, which is a lie. Then Shirley added, "I'm going to be around here a lot more. You'll see me around a lot more. You'll see me a lot rounder." This, of course, is a reference to her pregnancy. This was also confusing to Heather, but then Shirley told so many lies, it can be hard to see when she tosses a nugget of truth in there. 12 days earlier, on November 7th, Shirley told Heather on the phone that after visiting Andrew in Pennsylvania on October 20th, she returned to Iowa and miscarried. As it turned out, this time when she's talking about being pregnant, Shirley was being truthful. She was pregnant. And the baby, before even entering this world, would be hit with several devastating blows. That he will never meet his father, that his father was a victim of a violent homicide, that it was his mother who made his father that way, and that his mother is Shirley Jane Turner. The silver lining in all of this is that this baby had Kathleen and David Bagby as his army. On November 19, 2001, Pennsylvania state troopers requested that the Constabulary Intelligence Unit open a case file on Shirley Turner. In response to that request, they did so the following day, on November 20th, 2001. They opened up a case dedicated to assisting Pennsylvania law enforcement with their investigation into Andrew's murder. 2 constabulary members were sent to Andrew's November 20th memorial that the medical school at Memorial University had arranged. The service began at 12:30 p.m. The constabulary and university security videotaped and photographed the event. Shirley was in attendance. The mourners included almost all of the members of the medical school. After the service was over, Shirley approached one of the medical school members and introduced herself by pointing out that she was the one in the back sobbing for the duration of the service. She also told this person lies when she said that she was in Iowa when Andrew was killed. And she lied again when she told him that she learned of Andrew's death from her psychiatrist friend and fellow Memorial University Medical School graduate living in South Dakota. She also told a lie about coming to Newfoundland to help care for her son's medical needs as he'd been seriously injured in a car accident. The person Shirley was speaking to had had enough of this conversation, made an excuse to go elsewhere, and walked away. The person left standing there having to talk to Shirley was probably really mad at that other person who walked away, right? That was the medical school's officer for student affairs, who later told the Constabulary Intelligence Unit that Shirley talked mostly about herself, her son, and his car accident, as opposed to talking about Andrew, the man that they were there to mourn. Not once did Shirley reminisce about him, nor did she speak at the service. However, Heather was asked by Andrew's family to participate, which she did, and this made Shirley very upset. Following the service, Shirley approached Heather and verbally attacked her for taking part and speaking at his memorial. Heather immediately found a university security employee and reported to them that she had been confronted by Shirley. She also reported having received numerous disturbing phone calls from Shirley and was worried for her own safety. So concerned was Heather, she had someone move into her place to stay with her. Heather also reported that Shirley had told her that she had no intentions of returning to the United States. So she knows, at least for now, that Shirley is going to be lurking around. And acting as though nothing had happened at Andrew's memorial, Shirley called Heather the following morning, November 21st, at about 8:30. She told Heather that she was sad that Andrew was not there anymore. So the police are going to take into account what Shirley has to say. Later that day, Heather had a meeting with university security to talk about her concerns for her safety. And the following day, November 22nd, Heather gave a sworn statement to the Constabulary Intelligence Unit. She mainly discussed the phone and in-person conversations that she'd had with Shirley since Andrew's death. After the meeting, the constabulary arranged for a special patrol around Heather's place of residence for a period of time. The following day, on November 23rd, Heather received an email from Shirley. The message was aggressive and full of vitriol, accusing Heather of lies and manipulative behavior, while at the same time seemingly to brag about her intimate relationship that she had shared with Andrew. On November 27th, Shirley called Andrew's dad, David, and informed him that she had no intentions of returning to the United States. She said she walked away from all of her possessions, and as for the gun, she said the firearm didn't belong to her. For their part, the Constabulary Intelligence Unit gathered evidence that on November 28th, Shirley arranged to send her keys to her apartment in Council Bluffs, as well as her key to her mailbox to her attorney in Iowa by way of overnight courier. The Director of Intelligence and Contraband at the Canada Customs and Revenue Agency was asked to place an alert at the Canadian border crossing on Shirley. On November 29th, the intelligence unit added Shirley's place of residence as being her son's apartment, and they added an ominous warning to this notation to use caution with Shirley, that she had suicidal tendencies. And yet another warning sign. I mean, they've been peppered throughout here, but some really stand out. That same day, the 29th, Shirley had an appointment for an ultrasound, and the pregnancy was indeed confirmed. The paternity test would have to wait until the baby is born. But you bet your bottom dollar that Kathleen and David are going to be at the ready to fight hard for custody of that baby as soon as paternity is confirmed. On November 30th, the intelligence unit received information that some students at the medical school, some personally associated with Shirley, were concerned about her being around. The unit also received a phone call from a graduate from the medical school who was then residing in Nova Scotia. He said that he and another fellow graduate met with the Halifax police and reported that Shirley told him and his friend that she was in the parking lot in Keystone Park with Andrew the afternoon he was murdered. He also requested that he and the Halifax police be informed if Shirley leaves Newfoundland. So, Eastern Canada is pretty much under siege with Shirley running around freely. Clearly, many people are terrified of this woman. On December 1st, 2001, Pennsylvania state troopers executed a search warrant at Shirley's apartment in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Seized were some clothing and shoes. This second search warrant was prompted by the fact that Shirley told a colleague that when they searched her apartment on November 9th, the state troopers did not take the clothing and the shoes that she wore on November 5th and 6th. As the Constabulary Intelligence Unit had been keeping tabs on Shirley, they'd actually started doing so before the request from Pennsylvania state troopers was made. And on December 2nd, while keeping Shirley's apartment where she lived with her son under surveillance, she was observed bringing out a plastic bag filled with trash. The bag was immediately seized, and what they found inside confirmed for them that Shirley was pregnant. They found the results of an ultrasound that was conducted on November 29th, and 2 images of the fetus labeled S.J. Turner and A.D. Bagby. I don't know if it means anything to any one of you listening, but throwing away the ultrasound images? Anybody? I saved mine. I saved every single one of them. I still have them to this day. My kid's 20. But Shirley threw them away. I don't know if that's a big deal to you or not listening, but it kind of was to me. And this gives us even more of a glimpse into Shirley and just her ways. Between December 7th through the 11th, Shirley visited the west coast of the island of Newfoundland, and this was something that was determined by the ongoing surveillance conducted by the Constabulary Intelligence Unit. She stayed with her second ex-husband's wife. This would be the stepmother of Shirley's youngest child, who would be 11 at this time. Within a couple of months, Shirley filed a complaint alleging child abuse against her. On December 12th, Shirley returned to St. John's, and it was on the same day that an extradition proceeding commenced in Newfoundland that would have required Shirley to be brought into custody and sent from Newfoundland to Pennsylvania in order to stand trial for the criminal charges that had been filed against her, that she had murdered Andrew. By November 27, 2001, the investigation into Andrew's murder had brought about sufficient evidence for authorities in Pennsylvania to charge Shirley with first-degree murder of Andrew and criminal homicide, and a warrant for her arrest was obtained on both counts. That same day, State Trooper Kirk Nolan called the constabulary and informed them that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had issued a warrant for Shirley's arrest, alleging that she murdered Andrew. He also told the constabulary that he was headed to Newfoundland to attempt to execute the warrant unless Shirley would be willing to go in voluntarily. In that case, the United States would apply to the Newfoundland court and Canada's Minister of Justice to extradite her back to Pennsylvania. The following day, on November 28th, the constabulary informed Shirley that there was a warrant for her arrest that had been issued in Pennsylvania and asked to meet with her at her son's apartment that afternoon at 6:15 p.m. She said she would prefer to meet at the constabulary's headquarters. Shirley immediately called her attorney in Iowa. The attorney immediately called the constabulary in St. John's, and the meeting between Shirley and the constabulary did not take place. Shirley could have voluntarily submitted to the warrant issued in Pennsylvania. But no surprise here, she would not be doing that. She decided that she did not want to return to the United States unless she was extradited, which she has every right not to do. Shirley has lots and lots of rights here at every turn. Attached to the warrant for Shirley's arrest were all of the supporting documents related to the warrant. Among them was a statement of urgency that included allegations that Shirley fled her home in Council Bluffs, Iowa, upon learning that she was the focus of the investigation into Andrew's homicide, that she abandoned her apartment and belongings in Council Bluffs, that having failed to report for work at her position, she was effectively terminated, that she told Kathleen Bagby that she had been advised by her lawyer to go to Canada, that she further told Kathleen that she did not intend to return to the United States, that she was a danger to herself and to the community based on a 1999 suicide-related incident, and that she was a danger to the community based on the circumstantial evidence of the charges that Andrew's murder was committed by Shirley. So in Canada, the trial division of the Newfoundland Supreme Court may issue a warrant for a provisional arrest, requiring the person named in the arrest warrant from Pennsylvania to be taken into custody and will be subject to the extradition proceedings. This usually starts with a request from the Canadian Minister of Justice. The person wanted for the extradition will be brought before a Canadian Superior Court as soon as possible once the extradition partner, in this case the United States, has enough evidence to charge the person. Pennsylvania wanted Shirley arrested until she could be surrendered to the United States to face trial. An approval for the arrest of Shirley was given by the Minister of Justice, and on December 12, 2001, Canada's Attorney General applied for a warrant for Shirley's provisional arrest. In order for the application to be approved by a judge, 3 conditions must be met. 1. It is necessary in the public interest to arrest the person to prevent that person from escaping or committing an offense. 2. The person is ordinarily a resident in Canada, is in Canada, or is on the way to Canada. And 3. A warrant for the person's arrest or order of a similar nature has been issued or the person has been convicted. So a judge was satisfied that it was in the best interest of the public, and you're not actually going to hear that too often in many of the decisions made from here on out in this case. That Shirley's arrest was necessary, that she was usually a resident of Canada or was in Canada, and that a warrant for her arrest had been issued in Pennsylvania. Therefore, on December 12, 2001, the judge issued the warrant for Shirley's provisional arrest. For what it's worth, Shirley never said that she would take any measure to try to avoid arrest. The warrant was handed over to the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. On December 12th at 11:20 a.m., 2 Constabulary Intelligence Unit members, accompanied by Shirley's attorney, Randy Piercy, went to Shirley's son's apartment and took her into custody. She was brought to the constabulary headquarters in St. John's, and from there, she was escorted to the courthouse. When Shirley was brought into court, she applied for judicial interim release, aka bail. So the person subject to arrest, in this case Shirley, she's supposed to be detained in custody unless the accused can show cause that detention is unjustified. The Crown must justify detaining the accused generally. But because she's being charged with murder, she needs to establish why she should not be detained. So the task of convincing the court to deny Shirley's request for a release was not easy. In a 1996 decision in the Quebec Court of Appeal, the court decided that release is not to be refused to a person who may pose a risk of reoffending or interfering with the administration of justice while free, except where that person poses a substantial likelihood of doing so, and that substantial likelihood endangers the protection and safety of the public. Okay, so let me get this straight here. Release cannot be refused to a person who may pose a risk of reoffending, unless there is a substantial likelihood that it endangers the public. When we're talking about Shirley Turner and reoffending, the reoffending is murder. So it's a given that the reoffense, if the risk is there, will endanger the safety of the public. It's murder. But anyway, another thing about the Canadian Constitution is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Everybody has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right to not be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Further, a person has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty in a fair and public hearing by an independent tribunal. The person charged also has the right to not be denied reasonable bail without cause. However, the right of everyone to life, liberty, and security extends not only to the accused, but also the public, and factors related to the release of the accused include the nature of the offense, the circumstances of the offense, prior and subsequent events surrounding the offense, the likelihood of conviction, the degree of the participation of the accused person, the relationship between the accused and the victim, the profile of the accused, including occupation, lifestyle, criminal record, family situation, and mental state, conduct prior to the alleged offense, and the danger the accused's release represents for the community specifically affected by the offense. On December 12th, Shirley's case for release was heard. Her defense counsel stated to the court, "We have conditions we're going to offer to your lordship for release. So assuming from the Crown's perspective that is, at least for right now, Shirley is not a security risk, and I'd ask in light of that she be permitted to leave the dock and sit up here. I don't see a problem with that, my lord." The court asked, "You want to tell us how we get here for a start?" Defense counsel stated, "Shirley Turner was initially arrested pursuant to a provisional arrest warrant granted by this court, and the individuals responsible for arresting her had a responsibility to bring her before the court within 24 hours. Having brought this particular individual before the court, the issue of release pursuant to the Extradition Act now arises. What I would propose to the court are a number of release conditions, which, if acceptable to the court, are already acceptable to the Attorney General of Canada and the Defense Counsel regarding Shirley Turner's release." The court asked, "What is the position with respect to the release?" The defense counsel stated, "As far as release, my lord, what we would suggest is that Ms. Turner be released on a recognizance, with sureties in the amount of $75,000. I think all we are concerned with is that total of up to $75,000. We've arranged for people to come in that will total up to $75,000, my lord. One person is going to take $65,000, and there is a couple who are going to take another $10,000. Dreamers, it's worth mentioning that nobody has to come up with any amount of money up front for Shirley's bail. Like here in the United States, if someone has a bail amount set, like, that woman in Hawaii with the missing kids, Lori Vallow, she's recently been arrested basically for various things: desertion of a child, resisting and obstructing an officer, solicitation of a crime, and contempt of court. Her bail was set at $5 million, which is really high for these crimes. But because her case is so extraordinary, 2 judges have affirmed that her bail should be as such. In order for her to be released, someone is going to have to put up $50,000 in cash or equity in their home, which will have a lien placed on it if that person skips out on the bail. But in Canada, at least at this time, and for this case, nothing more than a promise to pay is required. No actual money has to be given. So Shirley has 3 people promising to pay a total of $75,000 if she fails to show up. And one of those persons, the one who had promised to pay $65,000 if Shirley failed to appear to face charges, is none other than that psychiatrist that she asked to be referred to, Dr. John Doucette. Sound a little misconducty to you? Yeah, it does. We'll revisit that a little bit later. It is Shirley's attorney's job to build her up, and it is not difficult. I understand Shirley has never had trouble finding men. She's not exactly the most exceptionally beautiful woman, at least I don't see it. Let's see, how should I put this? She's kind of unremarkable, sort of bookish, like a librarian. She appears pretty well put together. I mean, she's a doctor, for goodness sakes. She could be quite a catch to someone. On the surface, Shirley Turner simply does not appear to be someone anyone would be deathly afraid of. You have people left and right in this story in fear for their lives of this woman. Yet she is this slight, wispy, diminutive, bespectacled doctor mother of 3. Who'd have thought it? On the surface, that's how she presents, and it makes her attorney's job pretty easy. Her attorney pointed out to the court that Shirley had been very cooperative in keeping the members of the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary aware of her whereabouts, so nothing less than totally cooperative. The court responded, "Now then, I'm prepared, with the consent of counsel, to have the accused released on the conditions outlined by counsel, that this is the recognizance in the amount of $75,000 and the conditions as read into the record. I gather from this court officer certified transcripts that Canada/United States counsel and defense counsel consented that Shirley Turner to be released. Canada/United States counsel did not present any evidence other than documentation filed in court earlier in the day of its successful application for a provisional warrant of arrest. The court relied on the submission forms from both counsel and in their respective capacities as officers of the Supreme Court, submissions which consented to Shirley Turner's release from custody. For its part, the court had discretion independent of the criminal code to abide by the agreement of counsel that Shirley Turner be released. At the end of her hearing, the court set the next hearing date in the extradition proceeding for February 5th, 2002 at 10 a.m. So what does all of this mean, and what is this saying to us examining this case? Well, for starters, nobody argued against Shirley being released on an IOU. Neither side objected to it, which I find strange. As I mentioned a moment ago, Lori Vallow had a $5 million bail set. When her attorney argued for bail reduction, the prosecutor was like, if there was ever a case that called for bail like this, it's hers. If a judge went into this knowing absolutely nothing about Lori Vallow and the circumstances surrounding pretty much everything in her life, he or she might have agreed. But the judge was fully aware of the implications here. Misfortune befalls people in Lori Vallow's world, and she is clearly a danger to society. What the ruling on bail in Shirley's case also tells us is I don't think that the judge or the prosecution really did their homework in this case. I don't think they took a close look at Shirley's troubled history. Otherwise, I don't think bail would have been granted so hastily. I think there really needed to be a truly deeper understanding of what we were dealing with here. And they knew that Shirley was wanted for murder. So they were aware on some level what they were doing. The murder is the worst thing Shirley had been accused of doing up to this point, but it isn't necessarily the most disturbing thing that she's done if you run down the list that we've gone through in her past. They didn't take the time to review her history thoroughly enough and seemed to make a decision based on how Shirley presented in court and the assurances of her defense attorney that she's cooperative and accommodating. Two things Shirley Turner is absolutely not. After the recognizance was signed by Shirley and the 3 individuals who promised to pay, she was released. She was required to appear in court as ordered, to report weekly to the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, to reside at a stated St. John's address, to notify the constabulary 24 hours in advance of any address changes, to not leave Newfoundland, to surrender her passports, to have no dealings with weapons, and to have no contact or communicate with Andrew Bagby's family or with 7 other persons named in the court documents. And this included the ex-boyfriend in Pennsylvania, his parents, Andrew's ex-fiancée Heather, 2 other graduates from Memorial University, and her supervisor during those 2 periods of residency. This would remain in effect until November 14th, 2002. And for what it's worth, there was no indication that anyone knows of that Shirley violated any of these conditions of her release. So now, Shirley Turner, suspected murderer of Andrew Bagby, is free, roaming the streets of Newfoundland, and pregnant with her alleged victim's baby. We will end part 3 here with Shirley being granted bail. Part 4 will be along shortly. We'll pick up the story from there. Again, you will not have to wait long. Until next time, sweet dreams.